Thank you, Robin. So as Robin's just described, I am a member of the consortium, and the talk I've put together today is probably pretty old news for those members of our consortium who are on the call, but I was hoping that we could take this opportunity to educate kind of more generally to the general public what the B-CRATOS project is about from this BCI perspective. So I'm going to be talking a bit about some of the motivation and some of the needs in the markets for neuro devices and BCI systems, and where the B-CRATOS project fits in and what some of our goals will be. So this is going to be a lot less focused on science and research as Dr. Miller's talk was, but hopefully it could be of interest to people who want to learn more about the B-CRATOS project. So why do we focus on neural devices? We see that there's a gap in addressing neurological ailments with current medications, surgical approaches, therapies, and assistive technologies. We want to be able to do more, and we see BCI devices as being another powerful tool to address some of these conditions if we can design systems suitable for everyday use and bring them to the market. So just as a few examples, the World Health Organization has described that every year, something on the order of 500,000 people worldwide suffer a serious spinal cord injury, which of course can result in tetraplegia, issues with speaking, other issues, plethora of effects of a spinal cord injury, and that by 2030, at least 2 billion people will be using one or more assistive products to carry out their daily activities. Assistive products being anything from hearing aids to wheelchairs to possibly BCI systems. And of course, many millions of people worldwide live with the consequences of Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, dementia, depression, many other neurological disorders for which we don't have a great deal of effective medications or other interventions available. Somewhat controversially, for example, recently in the US, the FDA approved a new Alzheimer's medication that really wasn't perhaps for many clinicians convincingly proven through clinical trials to actually address the symptoms, but is still was approved provisionally so it can be investigated whether the kind of the molecular effects of that drug will actually help with the disease, because the need is so great with Alzheimer's, and the burden of that disease is growing over time. 1 second. Okay, so just more generally, what is a BCI? I guess after watching Lee's presentation, everybody should have a good grasp on this. But the BNCI roadmap released by Horizon 2020 kind of broadly describes BCI devices as devices that enable communication and control without movement. But more generally, in our thoughts, in the context of our project, we're talking about a readout of brain activity that's being transformed into some kind of action or control signal by some computer-based system. And then when we talk about closing the loop, what we're really talking about is providing feedback back to the brain. Often in the context of the devices I'm going to be talking about through direct electrical stimulation of neural tissue, but this can also be done through, say, magnetic fields, chemical release, optical techniques, and so on. And I've just kind of illustrated what this system really looks like down below in a cartoon fashion. But again, we're talking about readout of brain activity, some translation into a variety of actions, and then feedback back to the brain. So what would we like BCI systems to do? My thought always goes to Luke Skywalker's prosthetic hand from Empire Strikes Back, where Luke, a new amputee, is given a hand prosthetic that not only does he control as if it were his own hand, but also he senses the touch, the pain on the hand, as demonstrated in this scene in Empire Strikes Back. We're not there yet, but this is, I think, for many people in the field, sort of their vision of what we would like to make happen. Stephen Hawking, later in life, as another example of someone who could have benefited from a BCI system, was more and more relying on communication through muscle twitches in his cheek through a system designed for him, where he had been experiencing less and less ability to voluntarily control the muscles of his body. He was in fact able to write entire books, papers, lectures using this technique. And he himself described at that time that he had tried out some BCI systems and he had tried out some optically controlled systems and found them lacking when he had tried them out decades ago, and relied just on this muscle twitch system to communicate with the outside world. However, in research settings now, we are making progress towards these goals. So in the photo in the upper right, you can see a patient volunteer in Pittsburgh who is using a BCI system to control a prosthetic limb, in this case, to feed herself a chocolate bar. There's another group at Stanford that recently published on a system that is able to translate thoughts about forming speech into speech or into a text readout through a brain implant. And this is the kind of system that an individual such as Professor Hawking or others like him could greatly benefit from to improve their quality of life and their ability to interact with the outside world. Other applications of BCI that are still in the research stage, but we're hoping that could be translated to medical devices, involve regulating mood, improving memory. There are a couple studies in the past few years demonstrating that closed loop approaches with BCI could be used to either improve mood or improve memory performance through stimulation. And there are groups working on this right now, not ourselves, but other research groups. But they are going to need the technologies and the platform technologies to make these things happen in the real world. And that's what we're focused on with B-CRATOS. So what do modern devices do? The devices that are currently on the market and approved for treating clinical indications. So for epilepsy, for example, there are closed loop BCI systems available right now in which seizures are detected through changes in activity recorded in the brain on implanted electrodes. An algorithm processes this data and it makes a decision about whether to stimulate the brain and disrupt a seizure. So there are devices that currently on the market are doing this. There are also some that don't do the first step, where I have an asterisk here, and detect the seizure, but rather just stimulate to improve the patient's symptoms or prevent seizures from occurring. That kind of technology is really based on DBS technologies, which were pioneered in patients with Parkinson's, essential tremor dystonia, which are not perhaps brain-computer interfaces in the traditional way of thinking, where you're recording signals from the brain and then providing feedback, but rather more based on a pacemaker kind of approach, where you're going to generate a stimulation pattern and deliver it to electrodes targeting specific anatomical regions. Now, researchers are looking into closed loop approaches for these DBS systems, in which case biomarkers would be detected indicating perhaps a brain state or a symptomatic state, in which case stimulation should be delivered. But none of these are on the market yet, and the technologies have not been yet approved to do this in humans, as far as I know. And then finally, hearing loss is another example. Just briefly, the modern cochlear implant in many ways has become one of the inspirations for many of the next generation brain stimulation and BCI systems that are being developed, in which case sounds are detected and translated into a stimulation command, and nerve fibers are excited through direct stimulation in the cochlear nerve to aid in sound detection. But again, this isn't perhaps what you would think of as a traditional BCI device. It's not recording data from the brain, but rather just delivering stimulation. So these market-ready devices, Medtronic and other companies have developed these pulse generators for DBS systems. Some of them are becoming more sophisticated now. The Medtronic Percept, for example, has the ability to record data, local field potentials on the implanted stimulating electrodes, but this data is not yet being used for any specific clinical purpose. In fact, there is a disclaimer on their website saying such, that this data has not been proven to aid in the clinical approach, but rather it's just another tool available for the physicians. The NeuroPace RNS is the device used for treatment of epilepsy that I described earlier. Supports, I believe, up to 8 channels, 8 electrodes, and serves this very specific purpose of detecting seizures and stimulating, but is now becoming a new platform available for researchers to investigate other treatment of other indications. And then you have clinical use devices such as epilepsy monitoring systems, which are these large devices located in hospitals used for the diagnosis of epilepsy, can be thought of as BCI systems, but are really not systems that are practical for everyday use. And then there are many other devices out there in development, but not so many on the market. Many BCI systems have remained mired in sort of the research phase, but not moved to widespread clinical use. There are other nerve stimulation devices, for example, out there that I'm not including here. So what are some of the limitations and challenges? Why don't we see more BCI systems out there right now? Why don't we have systems that are allowing folks with tetraplegia to make better use of prosthetics or move their wheelchairs around with the thought of their mind? One of the major challenges has been in boosting the number of signals. I say channel count here, but really what I mean is when you're recording signals from the brain, can you record from many locations? Can you record from many different positions in the brain to support the kind of data analysis and the algorithms for complex control that we need? It's true if all you want to accomplish is for somebody to have enough degrees of freedom to, say, play Pong, you may not need so many electrodes implanted. But if you want to have a system that could be stable over many years of time and control complex movements of, say, a prosthetic hand, you will need a much more robust set of signals, possibly recorded from multiple regions of the brain, to supply this. And the current devices out there right now support very few channels of recording, and often at very restricted bandwidths. And the wireless technologies these devices are equipped with as well are insufficient to transmit large amounts of raw neural data off the device to other systems. Processing power is a challenge if you want to do everything in the device. Now you're going to run into size and power limitations for an implantable. So again, it may make sense to do the processing outside of an implantable device, but now you need a way to move that data. The wires and the physical size and portability that many of these systems come with are another challenge for the modern BCI system. The volunteer I described earlier who was feeding herself chocolate using a BCI system, as you can see in this other angle on the photo, you can actually see that there's large wires coming out from her head. These wires are running back to large computer systems. There's many more wires that you can't see outside of the frame. And there's a percutaneous connector that is allowing the signals to be moved from the implanted devices under the skin to outside the skin. There's an infection risk regarding these kinds of connectors, which requires more maintenance and poses greater risk to the patient. And of course, there's an aesthetic consideration as well. If your BCI system does not meet sort of an aesthetic standard considered acceptable by the users, you're just not going to see widespread user adoption for everyday use, and it may just not be practical for everyday use. So this is yet another factor that we're considering for the B-CRATOS project. Finally, battery technologies. Many devices are based on this kind of pacemaker technology where you have a battery included in the device. This results in bulkier devices, may require surgery to replace batteries after a certain period of use. And there's always a risk of battery failure. And that can be quite dangerous when you're thinking about it with respect to an implanted device. When a battery fails in your laptop, that's a problem too, especially if you're in an airplane. But if a battery fails and the device is on your skull, that's another story. And then finally, you want to have greater flexibility in the kind of control algorithms you can write to process neural data. So again, if you want to successfully close the loop, you need to have that flexibility with your system, and having the constraints of an implanted system just may be something holding back your system from being out on the market. So with B-CRATOS, what we're expecting to do to address some of these issues is to develop a new proof of concept brain implant device and system around it. We're going to be using Utah electrode arrays, the same technologies that Lee was describing as he had used in his studies. These electrode arrays have the capability of recording from a large number of neurons over long periods of time at a fairly high resolution of data. And 31 of 34, these numbers may have changed slightly as BCI systems are more and more being tested in humans, but a large number of human BCI implants have used this technology. It's considered to be fairly reliable for these applications. We're going to design a batteryless implant that uses continuous wireless power transfer from an external wearable device. For wireless data transfer, we are aiming to achieve high data rates using the RF backscatter technique that Robin described briefly earlier in his introduction. And we're hoping to be able to accomplish moving large amounts of raw neural data from an implanted device to external systems. This will allow us to process this data and design our simulation control algorithms in an external fashion without the hardware limitations that would be in an implant to better close the loop. And then we're going to put this all in packaging, compact packaging, designed for subcutaneous implantation on the human skull. So B-CRATOS is going to link this implant device to external prosthetics and computational modules for decoding and stim control. And a large kind of new innovation for the world of BCI that's going to be demonstrated in the B-CRATOS project is the use of this in-body microwave propagation technique through subdermal body fat layers, or FAT-IBC, which is a technology that Robin's group at Uppsala has pioneered and will be integrating with our implantable system that we're designing for B-CRATOS. I'm going to skip the next couple slides and just jump to the end because I think I've used up much of my time. But again, the B-CRATOS project, which is running from last March through 2025, our goals are to develop this integrated closed loop BCI platform. We're going to demonstrate this platform for bidirectional BCI control of a prosthetic hand in vivo in animals. And our long-term goal is to translate these platform technologies to enable new and more advanced real-world BCI applications. The project members I listed below, Robin had already introduced them at the beginning, so I won't go through that at the moment. But thank you very much for your attention. I hope you learned a little something about the B-CRATOS project and what some of our motivation is in the world of BCI, where we see ourselves fitting in. And if you'd like to learn more about the project, please do visit our website and follow our progress. So as you saw with this talk, I'm really talking more about our motivation and our goals and less about results, because we are still fairly early in the project. But we will be communicating a great deal about our results as our development and our testing continue over the coming years. So please do follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn. We'll also be posting updates through ResearchGate. And we will be scheduling further webinars like this as well to dive a little deeper into some of the technologies that will be making this BCI platform possible, such as the FAT-IBC technology, such as some of the wireless technologies, and technologies regarding the control algorithms for the prosthetic, the electronic sensing skin on the prosthetic and the prosthetic itself. And you'll have a lot of opportunities to learn about this in future webinars. So thank you.